a word society has long used as a weapon against women who refuse to live quietly. When women love to openly, speak too loudly, or claim control over their own bodies, they are quickly branded as reckless, immoral, and undeserving of respect. For Black women, that judgment has always been sharper, heavier, and far less forgiving. In the glamorous world of Hollywood and the music industry, desire became both a temptation and a trap. Talent alone was rarely enough. Visibility had a cost. Autonomy was seen as defiance, and freedom was too often punished with shame. But some women refused to bow. Instead of shrinking under public scorn, they turned it into fuel. They stepped onto the stage with fire in their voices and pride in their eyes, daring the world to look closer. Labeled rebellious, called out of control, yet that very refusal to be contained is what made them legends. In today's story, we examine 21 Black R&B women whose so-called promiscuity wasn't a scandal, but a declaration of freedom. Watch, listen, and rethink everything you were taught about desire, power, and survival.
Tina Turner, desire as survival, freedom as revenge. In 1976, on a rain-soaked night in Dallas, Tina Turner slipped out of a hotel room with only a few dollars in her pocket and a bruised, bleeding lip. That moment became legend, the night she escaped Ike Turner and walked away from a life built on fear and control. But what followed was more than a career comeback. It was a rebirth of instinct, body, and choice. Free for the first time, Tina refused to be told who to love, how to dress, or how to live. She dated younger men, dancers, musicians, even admirers, not to shock the world, but to remind herself that she was still desired and still in charge. Friends recall late-night gatherings filled with laughter, music, and exhaustion, as if she was dancing the past out of her bones. When critics whispered about her wildness, Tina answered calmly, freedom was her healing. What the world called promiscuity was, in truth, survival. And that fearless reclamation is why Tina Turner is remembered not only as the queen of rock and roll, but as the queen of freedom.
Anita Baker, silence, desire, and the price of power. Anita Baker built her legacy on restraint. In the 1980s, her voice, deep, velvety, and controlled, defined a new era of romantic soul. On stage, she appeared distant, elegant, untouchable. But behind the studio doors, a different story followed her name. In an industry ruled by men, whispers spread of private relationships with powerful producers and married executives, relationships never proven, never denied. Unlike others, Anita never explained herself. She understood that for Black women, discretion was often the only armor. Any ambition was quickly reframed as impropriety. Any desire became scandal. What some labeled promiscuity was, in reality, the quiet cost of survival in a world where talent alone rarely opened doors. Anita Baker did not use noise or spectacle to claim freedom. She used silence. And within that silence, she navigated power, desire, and control on her own terms. Her story reminds us that not all rebellion is loud, and not all survival stories are meant to be fully seen.
Chaka Khan is akin to freedom on fire, desire without apology. In the late 1970s, as funk ruled the dance floors of New York, Chaka Khan's voice cut through the smoke like electricity. Fierce, sensual, and unapologetic, she didn't just sing freedom, she embodied it. Every performance felt explosive, as if she were daring the world to keep up. But offstage, that same fire pulled her into a whirlwind of endless nights, crowded clubs, and relationships that burned as fast as they formed. Chaka was often seen with musicians, boxers, rebels, men drawn to her energy and fearlessness. Rumors followed her everywhere, especially during her infamous connection with Rick James, and whispers linking her to jazz legend Miles Davis. The headlines called it promiscuity. Chaka called it living without restraints. That freedom came at a cost: addiction, broken marriages, years nearly lost. Yet she survived. What many labeled excess was in truth defiance, a woman writing her own rules in a world determined to cage her. Chaka Khan remains not only the queen of funk, but a symbol of freedom fierce enough to leave scars and still sing on. Diana Ross, ambition in heels, power behind the smile. In the mid-1960s, as Motown searched out of Detroit and into the world, one figure rose higher than the rest: Diana Ross. On stage, she shimmered with elegance, her voice light and unmistakable, her smile perfectly composed. But behind that polish, whispers followed her every step. In a music empire ruled by men, Diana was rumored to have understood power better than most. Her close relationship with Motown founder Berry Gordy fueled endless speculation. Mentor, lover, strategist. The industry debated whether her climb was built on talent, desire, or both. Diana never clarified, and she didn't need to. Silence became her sharpest weapon. While critics called manipulation, was in truth survival in a system stacked against her. Diana Ross did not apologize for wanting more. She claimed space, visibility, and control, proving that sometimes the most dangerous power is quiet confidence wrapped in grace.
Etta James, loving like a storm in a world that never held her. Los Angeles, 1954. In a smoke-filled nightclub on Sunset Boulevard, a voice rose that sounded like truth tearing through the air. That was Etta James, raw, aching, unstoppable. On stage, she sang as if every note carried hunger, anger, and desire. Offstage, she lived the same way, without limits, without apology, and without safety nets. After every performance, Etta disappeared into the nights, hotels, bars, backrooms, often with different men, musicians, fighters, dangerous lovers drawn to her fire. The whispers called it promiscuity, but those close to her saw something else. They saw a woman abandoned too early, searching desperately to be wanted, to be held, even if only for a few hours. Love, for Etta, was never gentle. It was a storm she ran toward, not away from. Addiction followed, not as indulgence, but as escape. Her so-called wildness wasn't scandal, it was survival. And when Etta James sang, the world didn't just hear desire, it heard a wounded heart refusing to go silent.
Janet Jackson rewriting desire on her own terms. Born into the most famous family in music, Janet Jackson grew up surrounded by spotlight and silence. For years, she was expected to stay innocent, obedient, controlled, forever living in the shadow of a legendary name. But in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Janet made a decisive turn. With Control, Rhythm Nation, and later The Velvet Rope, she reclaimed her body, her voice, and her desire. Rumors followed her everywhere: secret relationships with celebrities, intimacies with dancers on tour. Public fascination quickly labeled her freedom as promiscuity. But Janet was never reckless. She was deliberate. Sexuality became her language of independence, a refusal to be owned by family, industry, or expectations placed on Black womanhood. What the public saw as scandal was in truth self-authorship. Janet used intimacy as power, vulnerability as strength, and desire as declaration. She didn't break her image to shock the world, she broke it to find herself. And in doing so, she redefined what control truly meant.
Martha Reeves, fame's sweet voice, pressure's hidden cost. As the leading voice of Martha and the Vandellas, Martha Reeves sounded like joy. In the 1960s, Dancing in the Street became an anthem of movement and unity, and Motown placed her at the center of its polished dream. But behind the harmonies and choreography, the pressure was relentless. Inside that pressure cooker, rumors followed: relationships with band members, with Motown staff, lines between work and intimacy blurring under constant scrutiny. The label was quick to brand her choices as promiscuity, but what they ignored was the weight of expectations, control, and exhaustion that came with fame, especially for a black woman asked to be flawless at all times. As success peaked, personal chaos crept in. Alcohol and drugs became escapes, and relationships spun out of control, pulling her career off course. Martha Reeves's story isn't one of moral failure, it's the cost of stardom without protection. Her so-called promiscuity reflected a woman overwhelmed by visibility, searching for grounding in a system that offered applause but little care once the music stopped.
Millie Jackson, saying the truth everyone else was afraid to say. Atlanta, 1977. The lights dim, the crowd leans in, and Millie Jackson steps onto the stage already daring the audience to judge her. Before she sings a note, she speaks about sex, desire, disappointment. Sharp, unfiltered, unapologetic. In an era when women were expected to be polite and restrained, Millie chose confrontation, and the world didn't know what to do with her. Critics labeled her vulgar. Radio stations banned her songs. The press called her promiscuous. But Millie wasn't chasing shock. She was exposing truth. She believed sex was the most honest language in music, and she lived by that belief on and off stage. Her relationships were brief, unclaimed, free of promises. Power, not romance, was the point. Millie Jackson didn't exploit desire, she reclaimed it. By refusing shame, she forced audiences to face what they hid. Her so-called promiscuity wasn't scandal, it was rebellion. And through it, Millie turned honesty into armor and made liberation impossible to ignore.
Minnie Ripperton, when gentle voices carry complicated truths. Minnie Ripperton was introduced to the world as softness itself. With a 5-octave range and a voice that floated rather than struck, she became the symbol of romantic purity in soul music. Loving You sounded like devotion made musical. But offstage, Minnie's emotional world was far more complex than her angelic image allowed. Within Chicago's artistic circles and recording studios, whispers emerged of blurred boundaries and infidelity, including rumors tied to powerful collaborators. Those close to her knew the tension she carried between being seen as gentle and living as a full, desiring human being. The world wasn't ready to accept that contradiction. When her marriage fractured, the press rushed to label her choices as promiscuity. What they overlooked was a woman pulling apart under expectations impossible to meet. Minnie didn't live recklessly. She lived honestly, even when honesty disrupted the image others loved. Her so-called promiscuity was not excess, but emotional truth. And through music, Minnie Ripperton transformed longing, confusion, and desire into beauty, proving that softness can still hold storms.
Ruth Brown, Desire as Armor and a Ruthless Industry. In the 1950s, Ruth Brown's voice helped invent modern R&B. Powerful, confident, and commanding, she dominated the charts at a time when black women were rarely allowed authority over their own careers. But behind this success, Ruth understood a harsher truth. Talent alone would not keep her safe in an industry built on control. Rumors followed her closely. Relationships with producers, DJs, influential men who could open doors or shut them forever. The press called it promiscuity. What they never acknowledged was the danger beneath the surface. Protection mattered. Survival mattered. And charm became a shield in a system that offered little mercy to independent black women. Ruth Brown used desire strategically, not recklessly. In an era where power was hoarded by men, intimacy became leverage. Her sexuality was not indulgence, it was armor. Though her story was often reduced to scandal, Ruth's legacy tells a different truth. Sometimes survival demands choices the world is quick to judge, and sometimes those choices are the reason a woman's voice is ever heard at all. What the world chose to label these women with was simply its fear of their freedom.
Each story we've heard is not about excess, but about survival in an industry that demanded obedience while profiting from talent. When Black women claimed desire, they were punished. When they sought love, they were judged. And when they refused to shrink, they were branded wrong. Yet through scandal, whispers, and condemnation, these women sang anyway. They turned shame into sound, judgment into rhythm, and pain into legacy. Their so-called promiscuity was often a language, one of resistance, healing, and self-preservation when no safer options existed. They were not reckless. They were responding to pressure no one else was willing to name. And by living loudly, loving freely, and refusing to disappear, they changed music forever. These stories ask us to listen differently, to question who controls morality, who benefits from shame, and why freedom in women still unsettles the world. Remember them not for rumors, but for courage.